Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again at Vitality. It's Kevin, and I have a lovely Sarah Khatri today joining us, who is a holistic nutritionist. We get quite a bit of questions about nutrition with what we do. At the clinic here, we do treat a lot of digestive issues. Just like, I'm going to get this out of the way. Hold on. Sorry. There we go. So we thought it would be really fun to have you on to discuss a little bit about, people talking about food intolerances all the time. And is it, does it make sense to say it's always one thing, or are there many? We always tell people, that's why we test. We want to know for sure if it is one particular irritant that is affecting their system, or is it maybe some lifestyle stuff that you're doing outside of that that's actually a problem. Mm-hmm. So maybe, Sarah, you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you got into this field.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So first, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. So my background, I studied holistic nutrition and naturopathy. I'm actually still studying naturopathy. There's always so much to learn in that field. Why did I study this? It's because I always felt that for myself, it made all the difference. What I eat makes all the difference.
Yep.
So from starting with myself, with reading a lot of books, studying, and then with my kids, when I had my kids, I wanted to give them only the best, but the best. So I did so much reading, and then I said, I have to get into this. I have to study it officially. And that's what I did. And now I love helping others, helping customers finding out what's the best way to eat for them, because it's not the same for everyone.
Great point. Yeah, great point. And we're actually telling that to people quite often, is that, people will say, oh, I found this diet my friend did and it really worked. I said, that's great, but you're not your friend. And it's often a problem with people where they go on all these tangents trying different things, but finding the right mix for them is obviously what's crucial, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the nutrition world, we often say there isn't a one-size-fits-all diet. There's so many different ways to do it. There are some major culprits, though. There are a few foods that everyone should be eating, vegetables.
Yeah.
And there are a few foods that, like we were saying, that cause intolerances to a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, so like from our standpoint, what we're always looking for sure, looking at people physically and what's going on with them. In osteopathy, we obviously look at the digestive system quite a bit, as well as other organs. But and it's amazing how much back pain comes from digestive issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So sometimes we have to backtrack, and obviously we're pretty axed on trying to find the primary kind of reason why something's happening. So it often happens that we have to, test to see, well, yeah, you're having XYZ that's causing an inflammatory response in your digestive system, and that's why that's tight and pulling on your back, that has compounded with time and caused this back pain. So the lifestyle change to us is huge. Like you can't walk out of here thinking you're going to go back to what you do normally and everything's going to be great. So sometimes there's a lot of educating, a lot of showing them through the testing we do with the applied kinesiology. It's pretty cool because it's pretty instantaneous. So we can test a lot of these intolerances. So sometimes we don't want to guess and just say, well, avoid dairy and wheat and you'll be fine. So along those lines, maybe we could talk a little bit from your standpoint, what are some of these intolerances that you see often?
Absolutely.
And then we can discuss maybe some alternatives after on what they could do to supplement for something else.
Absolutely. So I would say that the first major food or ingredient that causes intolerances is sugar. Yeah. So I mean, none of us should be eating so much added sugar. Some people, it affects them more than others. So it's the first thing to cut out if you want to eat healthier, or if you have some symptoms that you're trying to alleviate. I would say definitely the first major thing to cut out is added sugar. Yeah. And it's not so difficult to eat without sugar. It's a matter of eating whole foods, so not eating processed foods.
Processed foods, yeah.
So that's pretty much the answer to that.
So pretty much avoid the whole middle of the grocery store, basically.
Absolutely, that's it. Just you cook a lot, eat fruits and vegetables, things that don't have a food label.
Right.
Foods that don't have a label, those are the best foods to eat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sugar too, when we're talking to people about joint pain, for us, that's the number one thing we would look at in terms of decreasing arthritic type of dysfunction.
Yes.
Is avoiding sugar, because I always tell people it's like it's actually burning the joints. So it creates this friction in the joint that eats away at the cartilage and everything else. So anyone that's either arthritic or has arthritic types of inflammatory disease, sugar is probably the number one thing we're always looking at. How much of it do they have? Some people don't realize too that certain things they're eating, and or consuming have a tremendous amount of sugar.
Yes.
So
and a lot of people think that they're eating healthy, and I find I meet with a lot of customers and they tell me, oh no, sugar is not a problem. I'm more of a savory person. I like salty more than sugary. And then we go through their foods and we find out that yes, really they are eating a lot of sugar, because sugar is hidden in everything.
That's right.
So that's what happens. Yes.
So one of which is the dairy.
Yes.
Dairy. How much sugar is in milk, actually?
But that's actually a natural sugar.
Yeah.
But dairy is another one of those foods that that a lot of people would benefit from avoiding. But when we talk about added sugar, well, I'm putting more emphasis on refined sugars, on sugars that we add to food. Lactose and fructose are part of natural foods. So if they're eaten within a whole food, so like if you're eating fruits, the sugar from fruits is okay. But if you're drinking fruit juice, then that sugar is extracted from the fruit, so it's no longer beneficial, and it's, on the contrary, pretty harmful.
Right. So like anything that has added sugar to it, or is artificial.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything like that is to be avoided.
Yeah.
And even natural sugars taken out of their natural context are to be avoided.
Right. So, what would be some? So I'm assuming you get people that are coming in because they want to change the way they look, they want to change the way they feel.
Yes.
And is there a common thread of certain things you see that maybe people are eating too much of and that are maybe irritating their system?
Yes. So sugar, as we just discussed, and then there's dairy.
Yeah.
So dairy definitely is a problem for a lot of people. It's in everything. So again, when you're eating processed foods, there are a lot of ingredients that come from dairy products, and a lot of the popular foods. So people love cheese, yogurt, which is a supposedly health food. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad, but those flavored yogurts are definitely full of sugar.
Sure.
So that's not something that is going to, well, exactly. And then there's also gluten. So gluten-free diets have been shunned because we've been hearing so much about them, and then people go the other route. They buy everything gluten-free, but they're still processed foods.
Right.
So that's not something that we want to be.
Sometimes worse, often worse.
Absolutely. So the idea of removing dairy is to be eating more natural whole foods. It's not to be eating dairy-free processed foods.
That's right. So at the end of the day, one big thing is obviously the processed, right?
Yes.
So we want to avoid the processed stuff as much as possible.
Yes.
That's not even getting into GMO or things. We could do that another day. But so it's funny because when we test, quite often we have specific tests we can do for milk, for cheese, for specific protein, casein, lactose, things like that. So casein is one that we find quite often, which is a protein in milk.
Yes.
That is what is affecting the person's inflammatory response in the body.
Yes.
So it's kind of cool to be able to show, if, like we've talked about before, when we do intolerance tests, these are all through muscle testing, by actually having hold on, I'll get one just to show you. by having a what we have is like almost like a concentrate, homeopathic concentrate of whatever that element is. So gliadin we use quite often either that or gluten itself to test for wheat, and you could test specifically for wheat as well. So for instance, myself testing, I'm intolerant to wheat, but not gluten. So that doesn't mean go out and have a crazy amount of gluten. That just means that I don't respond the same way that a lot of people would if we tested them for that. The cool part is we could show them right away what the impact is.
Yes.
So we actually put a few drops under your tongue and do a bunch of measuring of amplitude of motion, muscle testing, pain sites on the body through neurological pain sites. And whenever you get something that's, that's positive, you would basically have weakening of the muscles and decreased range of motion and increased pain at those sites. So this is how we kind of be more specific with certain systems in the body. And then quite often, that's why I was happy that you were here, is that we try and educate them on like, okay, well, we need to avoid this food for, maybe that's something we could talk about, for 4 to 6 weeks would be our generalized kind of consensus, depending on how long they've had it, how chronic their situation is.
And how bad the symptoms are as well. That makes a difference, yes.
So, in general, I think when we test like that, it's pretty interesting because people see it. So for them, they're like, oh, yeah. It's not like we're suggesting and saying, well, maybe avoid this. It might make you feel better. We're showing them, like, this is really affecting your system. So then they're more apt to changing. But then is always the issue of, like, okay, well, what do I put in? The biggest thing is, what do I put in my coffee now?
Oh, yes.
So,
and people try all sorts of different things, and it's never the same.
Never the same.
And I tell them, when you replace it with something else, don't try to look for that same taste. Just think you're having something else, because it's never going to be the same,
That's it.
But I get that question a lot also.
And I'm sure you have the same.
Have it black. You don't need to put anything.
Do you still have, which caffeine is another one?
Yes,
Caffeine's
absolutely.
a big one.
Absolutely.
I'd say even more than dairy or gluten. Caffeine is, especially when things are related to liver functioning too. There's quite often a caffeine intolerance.
Well, and some people they feel it right away. Coffee gives them the jitters, and some people get addicted to it, where they need to drink more and more coffee, and then it really dehydrates you.
Absolutely.
And it also inhibits absorption of good nutrients. So yes, definitely.
So we often have situations like that where we have to convince people to do things. That's why, again, too, we want to do more of this, where we can educate people a little bit more on the why. And once people, you probably had that experience, I'm sure, when you're talking to a client, is that the more they understand what's going on, the easier that for them it will be to actually do it.
Absolutely. And then when they actually do the changes and they feel better, then they're encouraged. And then it's not so hard to not eat dairy or to not eat gluten when you're feeling so much better.
Absolutely.
And these foods are also very addictive. They give you this, your brain releases dopamine.
Sure.
So they make you feel good, so you want more of them. But when you stop eating them, you don't crave them as much. So that's what I tell people a lot, especially for sugar. It's difficult to quit at first. But then you get used to it, and it gets easier and easier.
But like you said, that's a great point. And especially when you start seeing that you're feeling better, it makes it a little bit easier to say no to something, because you know what it's going to do, right?
Yes.
And I've often noticed, or patients have said that, they've either taken something away and it took them a while to realize how bad they felt before. Even though they say, oh, no, it's not so bad. Because there's symptoms that people come in with sometimes. Where we have a box on our evaluation that says digestive problems. Okay, so we should maybe change the wording on it, because most people don't take it. And then you get down to talking to them. So, do you ever get bloating? Yeah. Do you get are you tired in the afternoon? Yes. Are you there's all these lists of symptoms. That's not normal? No.
No, that's it.
You shouldn't have low energy like that. So then it's finding out again, well, what is it that's causing it? And then showing them what normal would feel like. So that's it. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about what about the gluten? Because the big thing with people is, I tell them the same thing you said, is not necessarily to go out and replace that with non-gluten, because a lot of it is crappy. One, because it's processed, and two, you're still eating bread and all these other things, right?
So yes, so a lot of the gluten-free products, they replace the wheat flour with rice flour. Often it's white rice flour. There'll be a lot of corn flour. They'll use like tapioca starch, potato starch, different starches that we don't need, that we don't want to be eating. So there's nothing wrong with eating grains. It's better to eat whole grains, to eat the kernels. So like quinoa. Well, quinoa is not even a grain, but we use it as a grain. And it's more natural. It has more, it has a lot of fiber. It even has some protein. So it's better to have like a little bit of protein with a side of quinoa than to have like a big plate of pasta. So even if you're having gluten-free pasta, chances are it's white rice flour pasta. So it's not health food. It's not healthy food. No, so that's not what you want to be
alternative.
eating. Exactly, that's it. So it's better to be eating lots of fresh vegetables. Fill your plate with good things, and you're not going to miss the gluten so much. You're not going to miss the bread so much.
Exactly. Well, thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure.
We'll definitely do this again. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the easiest way to...
So I have my website, Khatri Nutrition, Khatri Nutrition. So my coordinates are there. So definitely contact me.
Awesome. Thanks again. We'll see you guys next week.